Okay, guys, we're officially started. We have Dr. Alex Harrison on with us today. He's going to be talking all things nutrition. We really appreciate him taking the time to come speak to us tonight. If you're new on this call, we take 30 minutes to dive into the topic for the evening. This is such a big topic that we really need to make sure we nail for the success in the sport. And Dr. Alex said if we still have more questions and anyone wants to dive into something specific for them, that he can stay on the call longer than 30 minutes, and all of you guys are welcome to stay on. And we will be recording this, time stamping and sending it out tomorrow. As I just spoke about, if you're just getting on, we are going to ask you to ask your questions through the chat so we can streamline the questions a little bit better. And then we will ask Dr. Alex for you. And then as things continue to come up, just keep kind of typing them in the chat. And it's worked for us thus far. So Coach Mike, if you can introduce Dr. Alex, and then we'll take it away from there.
Yeah, this is exciting. So Dr. Alex Harrison with us tonight. This is his second time being on the team call. I think our first time was about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago. So some things have probably changed in terms of maybe some recommendations. So excited to hear what he's got to say. I'll give him a chance here to kind of go over his background, but just so everybody knows, Dr. Harrison obviously is involved with RP Strength. Our relationship with RP Strength has kind of grown here over the last couple months. And so that's how I initially got hooked up with him. But Dr. Harrison specializes a little bit more in endurance sports. So I think some of the things we talk about tonight will be geared more towards triathletes. But I also want to mention too, if you're a slow twitcher, you're going to find him in the forums of Slow Twitch, and now a writer for the Slow Twitch website, Triathlete Magazine guest writer. So you can find his stuff all over the internet. But Dr. Alex Harrison, give us like a little brief synopsis of your background while we got to get these questions geared up in the chat.
Yeah. My name's Alex, so you can just call me Alex. Doctor feels funny, so background, let's see, track and field and bobsled professionally after that, and did bobsled for 3 years, and then finally decided to finish my doctoral dissertation in sport physiology.
Guys, is Alex breaking up, or is that just me? He is. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Right before my shoot.
Alex, you're breaking up pretty badly. I don't know if you can try to see if you have a better signal where you are.
Yeah, let's see here.
Yeah, I think you're good. The last couple of sentences were actually good. So let's try again.
Okay. Let me just make sure I've got a backup running here.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I should have had a backup on. Okay, seem okay?
Yeah, so honestly, you might have to just repeat yourself. Just start again, because none of that came through. So thank you. Okay.
Okay, got it. Yeah. Let's see. College track, high school track, and then professional bobsled. Went to world championships in bobsled. Can you guys hear me okay now?
Yeah, it's still kind of breaking up a little bit.
Maybe.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, checking on a new internet source here.
Okay.
Okay. It says I'm on a new internet source. How are we doing?
Good.
Good.
It looks like you're real time. Okay.
Okay.
Let's try again.
What happens if can I turn off you all's video? Does that change anything? Or can you shoot? Okay, but it's okay, you can hear me?
It's all good now. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Anyway, college track, pro bobsled, world championships, PhD in sport physiology, then co-founded Saturday morning with my wife, who's a low-level pro triathlete and pro cyclist, and also has a master's degree in sports science and registered dietitian. And so we co-founded Saturday, which is a company that focuses on primarily fueling for endurance sports. Let's see, what else? What did I miss? Been working for RP for 8 years, so I've been the endurance lead for a long time.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think the other thing to mention there too is your wife's a professional triathlete, and so you always skim over that part. I think that's an important detail to kind of put in there. So you're running like nutrition advice and stuff for your wife who does professional triathlons, which is kind of unique in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I skim over it at her request. She wants to be very humble.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. So as we kind of get some questions here, let's talk a little bit about just the Saturday app. I want you to talk about this thing first because I think it's can alleviate maybe a lot of questions for people down the road. So I want to give you a chance to really go over this thing. So Saturday, this app is a new deal. I was a beta tester for a while. It's incredible. Can you kind of give a breakdown of like what your goal was in terms of like developing the Saturday app and how you've implemented it in people's training?
Yeah, so the app is supposed to be a better version of me, fully concierge for every user. So I imagine myself as I make fuel for, say, a stage race for Michelle or for a big triathlon for Michelle. If I make her bottles, the level of service you would have if you had a personal one-on-one coach in your kitchen. It basically writes your nutrition plan for the race. It gets to know you over the course of your season. That's where we're going. Right now, it optimizes your fuel based on 20 variables it takes in during onboarding, and it outputs how much carbs, how much sodium, and how much water you need during every training session and every race.
I was just up into the Training Peaks headquarters too, and I know you mentioned that you just got API access to Training Peaks, which obviously is a pretty cool deal. So hopefully at some point here, moving forward, we'll have access to be able to send information back and forth between Training Peaks, which obviously we all use in training. Before we jump into some of these questions, I do kind of want to give everybody let's just talk about like general like intro workout nutrition advice. So let's say you have a brand new athlete that comes to you, so you don't have a ton of background data on them, right? And this, I'm assuming this is probably how you answer a lot of questions on the internet because you don't know much about people's backgrounds in those forums. So what is kind of your, catch all like general recommendation for athletes looking to fuel, let's say longer workouts, right? So long bikes, long runs, kind of what is your go-to kind of catch all for that?
Yeah, I always tell people to think about it in terms of carbohydrate hourly rate, sodium hourly rate, and fluid hourly rate. You nail those 3 hourly intake rates, and you'll do really well. And you need to think about your glucose fructose ratio. So glucose and fructose are monosaccharides, and they're both found in sucrose, which is really convenient. You can also get glucose from maltodextrin. But the key is you need to have a glucose fructose ratio somewhere between 2-to-1 and 1-to-1 in your total intake. So that comes all your gels, all of your sugar, whatever you pour in your bottle, any Morton or anything else, SIS, whatever you're using. It needs to hit a glucose fructose ratio between 2-to-1 and 1-to-1. And then as long as you've got that, you can push your carb intake rate basically as high as your gut will allow for however hard you're going, however long you're going, and however much you're sweating. So for some people, that might only be 60 grams of carbs per hour. But for other people, there's a lot of folks who are handling 120, 130 grams of carbs per hour. And the key is you just have to manage your hydration with sodium and water after that. So as long as you manage your sodium and water, high carb intake can generally be really, really beneficial for training performance, and especially for how you feel after every training session, because you'll feel a lot less depleted if you're fueling really, really well.
Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say, I was going to unpack that a little bit. So let's start with the carbs per hour. Okay. What is the recommendation for athletes, because the range there 60 to 120, right? What determines that range? Is there, obviously you mentioned intensity, duration, stuff like that, but is there kind of a general recommendation for athletes, that maybe aren't fueling very well right now? Like what are their kind of next steps? Like somebody who has zero idea how many grams of carbs per hour they're taking in. What is kind of your go-to there in terms of, hey, here's what we should be doing?
Yeah. So if if folks are consuming like 20 grams of carbs per hour or don't know what they're doing, or maybe it's a gel every 40 minutes or something like that, you come from running, maybe the go-to for you is a gel every 45 minutes after 90 minutes or something like that. That's a really common thing. Your baseline where you can start for your carb hourly rate is probably at least 60 grams per hour. There's very, very few people who, especially during cycling, can't handle 60 grams of carbs per hour. And most people can step into like 70 or 80 grams of carbs per hour. But if you want to play it safe, yeah, 50 or 60 is super tolerable for a lot of folks. Where people go wrong is they'll try to target 60 grams of carbs per hour, but like miss out on hydration. And so their fluid and sodium intake won't be sufficient to maintain hydration early on in their ride or run. And then they'll take a gel and all of a sudden they get gut distress. Yeah, that's probably the typical downfall we see.
Yeah, that was where I was going next. So obviously the next piece of the puzzle there that you mentioned, after you kind of start to hone in on carbs per hour, is the hydration piece, right? And I think one of the biggest questions I get, or one of the most frequent questions I get from athletes outside of NVDM, because everybody inside of NVDM nails this, is they'll always say, well, you know, on the back half of an Ironman, like my gut, you know, like I can't take any more fuel in, my gut hurts, or, you know, I'm nauseous, things like that. And I typically, my first response will be, well, how much sodium, how much fluid did you take in? And typically they can't answer that question. So why is that such an important piece of the puzzle? Because I think a lot of people are shifting towards this mindset of like, okay, I'm going to get in 100 grams of carbs per hour. Like, I know this, but then they still struggle because that's the first piece of the puzzle and they're not focusing on that second and third piece. Why is that so important?
Yeah, really good question. The reason hydration is so important for carb absorption is because once your body undergoes a certain degree of dehydration, your body will have less blood volume, and less blood volume means your gut is not as well hydrated by that blood. So blood is what carries your water to your gut, and your gut needs blood to function. So basically, a hydrated gut is a happy gut, and if you get dehydrated, then usually later, you'll sense that your gut is not functioning as well. So if you lose 3 or 4 pounds in the first couple hours of your activity, yeah, 4 hours into your activity, you're going to have gut issues because your gut is not being serviced well by the blood supply.
How does an athlete, you know, we talked about the carb range right there, and obviously work with a coach or use the Saturday app to kind of dial in that carb range. But how does an athlete go about hydrating properly? Like in terms of milligrams of sodium, in terms of the type of sodium, right? Stuff like that. Plus then how many ounces of fluid should they be looking to target to make sure that they're not dehydrated?
Yeah, and that really depends, and especially in warm climates, and especially right now in the spring as temperatures are rising, or like spring, and I mean, you guys are in summer now. Like the ranges you might experience of sweat loss is, first of all, sweat loss is what matters. So if you're losing, the more water you lose, the more you need to replace, and the longer you go, the more water you need to replace. So the goal is keep your body weight from going down by more than 1%, because your gut will function best when you stay above 1% water loss. There's lots and lots of discussion about can you perform athletically with more loss than 1%, like 2% or 3% body weight loss due to water loss via sweat? And yes, the answer is yes. You can probably perform athletically with more water loss, but your gut can't perform. And so if you're going to target carb intakes like that require gut performance, you will need to stay more hydrated than you would otherwise.
I think it's also important too to note, because I think a lot of people will look at like sodium is the big like hitter here, right? Like everybody's like, how much sodium are you getting in? And I think it's crucial to understand the role that sodium plays in sweat loss, right? And so can you kind of explain a little bit why sodium is so talked about so frequently when it comes to the electrolyte that matters, and what role it plays in preventing that greater than 1% loss of water?
Yes. So sodium does two really big things. One, it helps you hold on to the water that you drink. instead of passing it through your kidneys and out your bladder into excretion. So sodium helps you hold the water you drink, and sodium increases your drive to consume water. So you will actually consume a more adequate amount of water more naturally, even when you're like at a high intensity, because your thirst drive will basically be higher when you onboard more sodium. There's another subtle thing that sodium does, which is it helps you absorb the carbohydrates that are in your gut too. That's sort of like a third tertiary thing.
Yeah. I think I'm going to do a shameless plug here for Levlin, obviously one of our sponsors. And so this is a way, through sweat testing through them, that you can kind of really dial in like how much sodium you lose through your sweat, how much, your sweat rate. The old school way of doing this was just to weigh in before a session, weigh out, and basically keep a journal for a long amount of time. But we've kind of replaced some of that with some more scientific testing through Levlin and stuff like that. So that's one way. The other thing I was going to say here too is I'll give you a chance, because I know somebody's always going to say, well, what about potassium, or what about the 13 other different electrolytes that are supposed to matter? Why do we focus less on the other sources of electrolytes versus like sodium?
Good question. Yeah. Number one, potassium doesn't help with water balance as much, and it doesn't help with keeping water in your bloodstream, which is where you want it. Hydration is defined as blood volume, as far as I'm concerned. So the blood volume, you want higher blood volume so that you can have more blood beat per beat of the heart and more oxygen delivered to your muscles. Blood volume matters. Sodium helps keep the water in your blood. Other electrolytes don't do that. Other electrolytes don't, they're not as cramp protective as sodium is. And so people will have read things about maybe magnesium helping in the function, like muscle contractile function, or potassium helping in electrolyte balance, that sort of thing, calcium. And yes, those things are true, but they are so limited in the magnitude of their truth that it becomes negligible. You pretty much don't need them. I would say in very, very extreme scenarios, larger bodied people sometimes do need a tiny bit of calcium for like very extreme sweat rates for like 12 plus hours, maybe.
Yeah. And I'll add this too. I think it's very hard to overdose on sodium. You would have to be trying extremely, extremely hard. Whereas some of those other electrolytes you can cause major issues if you take them in too high of quantity. So I think that's why, you're not going to be able to go out there and find like a bag full of potassium that you can stick inside a bottle, right? It's going to be less likely to do that. And I'll give you this will kind of, I think, go across a lot of different spectrums, but in terms of when you hear people talking about the importance of, say, potassium or magnesium, do you automatically default that to something that's what I call marketing speak in a lot of ways, where, a lot of these things are so close in proximity, or they're so similar in a lot of ways, that nutrition companies have to find a way to differentiate themselves, and they do that through marketing. Can you kind of just elaborate a little bit on your experience through all these companies and how they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a bit of a passion point for Michelle and I, because you hit the nail on the head when you said a lot of the products that are available on the market are very similar, and a lot of the differences are things that companies are doing primarily for marketing, or primarily because they need something to differentiate them from everybody else on the market. Because there's been a convergence of understanding of what is needed in a supplement, in a carbs, sodium, hydration, energy supplement. So yes, I would say from the company perspective, yes, it's mostly marketing. A lot of companies also just don't really understand the science. And so they see 36 other companies, including potassium and magnesium, and they think, yep, we'll include potassium and magnesium.
What are some things that companies are, quote unquote, marketing, right, that you would not consider marketing speak, right, that you would consider like a high value proposition? And I'll give you an example. I think the thing that comes to mind for me is like the ratio of glucose to fructose, right? I think that is something that wasn't talked about very highly before. And a lot of companies didn't even disclose what their ratio was. Whereas now in the past, we are now starting to see companies that are coming out and pushing closer to that 1-to-1, right? Or, in that range of 2-to-1 and then even closer to 1-to-1. A company like Martin, right, kind of comes to mind in terms of being on the forefront of this idea that people actually care about this. So is there anything out there that you would consider, if a company is talking about it, then that it might be something to look into, or something that athletes should be looking into when it comes to looking for products?
Yeah, the things that jump to mind are, yes, the glucose fructose ratio, and the source of sodium. So similar, glucose fructose ratio is really a breakdown of the source of the carbohydrates. The carbohydrates are coming from glucose and fructose. The source of sodium should be from sodium chloride or sodium citrate, and preferably at least some sodium citrate, because sodium chloride, if consumed at the levels necessary to get you to the sodium consumption rate you need, can basically over chloride your gut and over osmolarity your gut a bit. It might just be the chloride, but it might do two things that are bad for your gut, whereas sodium citrate provides no chloride and won't overload the gut chloride, and it will also keep the osmolarity lower, which basically just means your gut will continue to function better with less chance of gut distress.
Yeah, that the thing that comes to mind, and guys, I promise we're gonna get to these questions, but I think this is some good stuff. The thing that comes to mind there is like people peddling like Himalayan sea salt, right? Because it's natural and sounds good to put on a package.
I will say one thing. So I have long been of that same mind where I'm like, okay, this is sugar in the raw Himalayan sea salt. It's all like it's marketing, but I will say this: psychology is important. And if something makes you feel better, I wouldn't discount it completely, because there is a gut-brain connection. I'm not saying you need to go out and get sugar in the raw. It's not chemically better, but if you feel better when you're using a product like Himalayan sea salt or Himalayan salt or sea salt or whatever makes you feel better, or maybe it tastes better, that might actually make it absorb better, because your brain is just you're more like being more true to yourself,
right?
And the gut brain connection matters a lot.
Well, and if you like something, then you're more likely to consume it, right? If you're just trying to force something down, maybe subconsciously you're not as excited to drink that bottle. Natasha had a good question here before I pivot a little bit. She said, how much chloride is too much chloride and then would cause gut distress? Because I think that's a big one that can happen.
Really good question. I don't know, but I can give you some educated guesses. It depends primarily on current hydration status. So maybe 300 or 500, excuse me. If you're getting exclusively table salt, if you're getting all of your sodium exclusively from table salt, and you're getting 300 to 500 milligrams of sodium per hour, the chloride that would come from that might overload a dehydrated gut, but that would be totally tolerable in a well-hydrated gut. So I've had lots of folks get like 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams of sodium per hour from just table salt and be fine. But when they get dehydrated towards the end of a session, that 1,200 milligrams of sodium per hour from table salt can become problematic, whether it's from the chloride overload or from osmolarity being too high. We don't have good science on that. Yeah.
You keep saying the word osmolarity, and that's where I was about to pivot to. So one of the big things with, your fueling recommendations and the recommendations that we all talk about, and then what the app is going to recommend, right, at these higher rates, right? When you start talking about 100 grams per carb an hour, thousands of milligrams of sodium per hour, right? The importance of osmolarity comes into play here now, because to get all of that in, you essentially have to start concentrating things. And so can you talk a little bit about what osmolarity is, why it's so important, and if you mess it up, what can it do?
Yeah, so osmolarity is defined as the number of molecules per liter. So how many sodium ions, how many citrate ions, how many chloride ions, how many carbohydrate molecules are dissolved in the liter of water. The good news for both our biology when we exercise and our brains while we're in the kitchen trying to figure this all out is osmolarity matters much less than things like energy density and hourly intake rates of carbs and sodium in general. So you don't actually have to do osmolarity calculations to get your nutrition right, thank goodness. Yeah, you can think of carb concentrations, which might, so just back of the envelope stuff here for your notes if you're taking them. You might have heard 6 to 8%. That was pushed by Gatorade for a lot in the early 2000s, mid 2010s ish. 6 to 8% is great if you're in a dehydrated state and you need it to be really easy on your gut. 6 to 8% solutions are 60 to 80 grams of carbs per liter of water. But in a hydrated state, yeah, you can do 10%, 12%, 15%. If it's cool out and your sweat rate is low, but you still want high carb rate, you can be doing like 20, 25%, which would be 200 to 250 grams of carbs per liter of water. So like imagine a cold ride in the winter, like virtually no sweat rate, but you're pushing the pace like it's like near threshold a bunch of the time. Yeah, you might end up doing 20% solution and being just fine. But so osmolarity is less important.
Yeah. That is I think the thing that the big takeaway for me there, even just listening to that after talking about this for so many years, is dehydration is the key, right? Like osmolarity is not the key. It's what you're putting that solution into. Are you in a hydrated state? Are you in a dehydrated state? And that is going to change throughout a race. And that's why I think it's important to think about it, not just, at the start of the race, but, how are you going to feel? Because I think the other big question is like, how do you feel the run, right? Because I think we all talk so much about fueling the bike, but then what happens on the run, right? And so now that we got two different factors, two other variables that we're bringing into it, the dehydration piece, right? Because you're further into the race, plus the intensity changes, right? Because you're running and you're no longer cycling. So what would be kind of a general recommendation for somebody who's doing like maybe say a 70.3 or an Ironman, where they're going to really preload, like front load the nutrition on the bike and then, go to the run? What's the idea there?
Yeah, I have, there's no research on this, totally zero. But I've been paying attention and I've been collecting anecdotes from as many people as I can possibly gather.
Yeah.
And we've had people use the app to fuel 70.3's Ironman. And some people honestly don't need a reduced rate on the run, which then my first thought when I hear that is, well, could they have taken more on the bike? But some people legitimately don't have any decreased gut function during running compared to riding. I'm not one of those people. I definitely have decreased gut function during running compared to riding. So my rule of thumb for myself is I drop carb intake rate by 20% ish, ballpark 25% maybe on the run. I probably keep sodium up around the same, and I definitely use mostly sodium citrate on the run, mostly or totally sodium citrate. And then you just have to listen in an Ironman or 70.3. You just have to be listening to your gut and listening to those signs like, okay, I'm getting a little rumbling, or like, okay, I'm pretty full, getting burpy. You need to listen and like basically respect your gut. And when the gut starts to tell you that it's a little overloaded, you have to back off something. And usually backing off carbs is the first thing to do, just a touch, but keep pushing the fluid and sodium so that your hydration level is maintained. And then get back on sipping carbs as frequently as possible, as tolerated.
I think that was kind of around, there's a question here about how quick recovery method to nausea on the course. And I think that's kind of a roundabout way to say, if you are starting to feel nauseous, especially on the run course, the course of action there would be to maybe pull back a little bit on the carbohydrates but continue to push the fluid, right?
And maybe take pace down like 10 seconds a mile, something like that, or up rather slower.
Yeah. All right, guys, I'm going to start running through some of these questions. So if you have anything in here, let's rock and roll. Like we said, I was going to say it again, Alex is going to be on the call with us longer tonight. So even if you have specific nutrition questions for yourself, like he's willing to stick on here and talk about them. So
Reminder.
My computer's yelling at me.
No, I was like, who's talking? Doesn't sound like Natasha. You're good. All right, so let's talk. Here we go. Lee asked, what are your thoughts on diet consisting primarily of carbs? So I think a lot of the time people get these recommendations, right? 40% carbs, 30% fat, 30% protein, right? What is your general thoughts on just like, I guess that's like everyday nutrition and kind of the breakup there of like percentage of your daily calorie intake?
Yeah, it really depends on how much training you're doing. The more volume of training you're doing, the greater percentage of your diet is going to be carbohydrate. So carbohydrate has to match your energy output, or exceed it. So if you're training 20 hours a week, that might be like 70% carbs, 10, 15, 20% fat, 10, 15% protein. If you're training 6 hours a week, it might be, closer to what the numbers you mentioned.
That's good. I think we talk in terms of like thinking about everyday nutrition. We always talk about it in terms of like creating a deficit. And so I don't want to talk about it in creating a deficit. I want to talk about it in like maintenance. So if you're an athlete who is in maintenance, right, and training, let's say for a half Ironman, whatever, training 10, 15 hours a week, and you're kind of looking at your daily nutrition intake, and you mentioned it there, like carbohydrates should be probably the first thing you're looking at, especially in and around training. I would tend to say the next macronutrient that you would want to make sure that you're consuming enough of would be protein, to make sure that you're not losing a ton of muscle mass, and then kind of backfill your maintenance calories with the fats. Would that be a general recommendation that you would agree with?
Yep. Yeah, that's spot on. And just for a quick recommendation for like how much protein should I be getting? I'd say 0.6 to 0.8 grams per pound is a good like starting range for endurance athletes.
I just did that RP strength nutrition course, and that is definitely not the recommendation for most people. So sure. That one's a little bit higher.
0.8 to 1.2 or something.
Yeah. But there, at that point, you're talking about people who are primarily training with weights versus like endurance training. So, all right, let's open this can of worms real quick. If someone is fat adapted, what does that mean for fueling, and why do we hear it so often?
Yeah, really, really good question. It can mean different things because fat adapted can mean very different things to different people. If let's take the most extreme, like somebody who's really just consuming less than 30 grams of carbs per day for a long time, their gut and physiology of their muscles is going to have adapted to that, and they're going to be less carb tolerant and less able to use the carbohydrates that they consume than somebody who's like just kind of low carb, but maybe the second person consumes like 40 grams of carbs per hour on some of their harder rides. That second person is going to be able to fuel at a much higher rate safely without GI issues than somebody who's like super low carb all the time. That said, everybody can use carbs during training and during racing always. This is anecdotal, and I know these guys talk about it, but even like fat adapted athletes who are low to no carb are still going to race on carbohydrates. So it's just all make sure we understand that. I was going to ask, how long does it generally take to become fat adapted? Yeah, really good question. How long can your training career be? That's sort of the answer. Yes, you can encourage fat adaptation, meaning a fuel preference for fat oxidation, but it's a question I haven't considered. It doesn't take that long, and it doesn't take that long for the carbohydrates or for the carbohydrate oxidation ability to drop. But it's a question I haven't considered at great length to have a really detailed answer for, because there just aren't there aren't useful scenarios where fat adaptation via dietary manipulation, as in carb restriction, is a good idea for triathlon or sport performance of any kind.
I think
certainly Dan Plews is like he's very successful for sure. It can be done, but there are trade-offs.
I think that anecdotally, again, through my experience in coaching and talking with a number of athletes, when I hear somebody who wants to be fat adapted or wants to use fat as fuel, right? Because those are kind of the buzzwords that everybody uses or talks about. And so you always hear like burn fat, right? That we want to burn fat as fuel. And I think that like in a lot of athletes' mind, it's like, well, if I go out and I don't fuel this ride with carbohydrates, then I'm automatically just burning fat, right? Like I'm just going to lose weight and the fat is going to come off my body because I'm not ingesting carbohydrates. Can you just this is probably a very deep rabbit hole, but can you give a high level view of why that is not how the body works?
For one thing, there's carbs in your muscles and your body will burn those carbs. But the biggest truth that gets through to people, I think, is that's very one stage thinking, and your body is not one stage at all. It has homeostatic mechanisms that reverse any changes you make to it. So if you burn a bunch of fat because you do not consume anything for a 3-hour bike ride, your body's going to say, we're missing a lot of fat compared to 3 hours ago, and it's going to put it back. It's going to find a way to put it back over the next day or two. So there's not actually a net benefit of fat tissue loss from doing fat adapted training or doing carb restricted training.
How does one get a net fat tissue loss? Again, very high level, just basic understanding here.
Yeah,
how does one create that?
kcal deficit and a reasonable balanced carb fat protein distribution that matches your training
over time, right?
Over time, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. This is the last thing I'll say about this too, because we had a coaches call a couple weeks ago where again, I don't know if everybody knows this, but as coaches, we get together once a month and kind of share ideas and talk and just have a roundtable. And we're talking about nutrition. And one of the things that Coach Harold said that really stuck with me was there's not a singular way to do nutrition for anybody, right? Like there's multiple ways to do nutrition, to do diets, to do all of these things. And so if you hear somebody that is peddling you one way and that they're saying that this is the only way, that is your red flag should go up immediately, because that person is trying to sell you something.
Yes,
and I think you would agree with that, right?
100%.
All right. Should someone diversify carb sources during training and racing? So I think this question came from Wes, and what he was saying was solids, gels, drink mixture, not necessarily, I think, where you would think, which would be like glucose, fructose, right?
That was the answer I was going to give.
You can answer it by saying that, but yeah, should you diversify?
Yeah, should we diversify the means of digesting the glucose and fructose? Should you? No. Could you? Yes, probably. But gels and chews introduce another variable, another complexity that can cause higher frequency of GI distress or slightly delayed absorption and oxidation rate of that fuel. So if you have no GI issues and you're feeling great, yeah, go for it. That will not be a problem at all. If you have GI issues, those should be the things that you remove. If you're a person who's never fueled before, start with liquid fuel first. It's the simplest to get in, simplest to do in your kitchen. Yeah, liquid is the safest bet.
Yeah, I think that goes back to there's not a singular way to do any of this stuff. And so whatever works for you is going to be the best thing. Obviously, we will provide recommendations. And I think the biggest pushback we get on liquid nutrition is a lot of people just say, well, I'm going to have to eat something, or I'm going to have something solid throughout the day. And I always point to actually your wife, Michelle, who did, I'm going to get this wrong and you can correct me, but I know she did the Rafa 500, which is 500 kilometers in a single ride, all on liquid nutrition, which was impressive. But then she had to go and top herself. And I think she did a double Mariana Trench, or
just a single, but she did it on a shallow slope. So lots of miles.
Gotcha. Yeah. It was like a double, it was a double Everest. That's what it was. So like multiple Everests in one ride, which I think took her like 30 hours, again, on all liquid nutrition, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the message I always send is, if you feel the need to eat, ask yourself if it's just because you like to eat while you train, or if you're hungry. If you're hungry, you are behind on your fuel, and you should be consuming your liquid fuel at a faster rate throughout all of your training from the beginning.
All the clients you work with, just to reiterate what you're saying right now, is you recommend liquid nutrition and just trying to stick to liquid nutrition to fuel, whether they're fueling a 9-hour Ironman or 16-hour Ironman. If they can do it, that's your recommendation. That's
absolutely where I start. But there are lots of folks with, they have years and years of experience of using salt tabs and gels. And some of that is psychologically comforting. So if you're comfortable with something, you need to take that into consideration too.
I'm going to get back to the questions here, but what would your recommendation be? What do they call it on Slow Twitch now? Like the speed nectar or whatever is like almost like your proprietary blend of sugar, salt, and water.
Yeah.
What is kind of your recommendation for some simplicity, right? So to eliminate some of these variables, how do you have your athletes fuel, to start at least?
Yeah, to start, I let them use whatever drink mix that they are typically using, and then I start asking them to add or replace some of it with table sugar and salt if they have that, or sodium citrate if they have that. So sugar and salt are a perfect replacement for most of the beverages that are on the market. It's actually better than most of the beverages on the market. So that's like, people I think a lot of times think I'm just cheap or I'm trying to save them money, but it's actually more optimal if you add sugar to most every product on the market. It makes every product better and easier for your gut to absorb.
I think that's a better way to describe it, because I have this, like, every time I talk about this, again, I always bring up the money saving side of it, right? That's a benefit of doing it this way. And I guess I should lead with the benefits of it just being better, because
It's like
most people typically come back and they say, well, that can't be better because it's cheaper. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, this is just the mindset we have as like consumers, and what companies tell us, right? The more expensive a product is, the better it is, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's the biggest hurdle that I have with athletes trying to come to this like homemade drink mixture, sugar, sodium citrate, is like,
Yes.
well, you know, and I'm going to pick on Martin because
Possibly
they're not a sponsor of ours, but like Martin is so expensive, right?
Yes.
And so everybody's like, well, it has to be the best because it's expensive. Is that do you have similar experiences like that?
Yeah, absolutely. This whole startup experience in the software space, the app space, has been an exercise in branding and marketing. I've learned so much. It is so powerful when you charge $2.49 a gel on sale. People buy in. Your packaging is gorgeous. It's easy to use because it rips open easy and it's single serve. And and you've got something that differentiates you from everybody else on the market, like the sodium alginate, which doesn't do anything. Um, it changes the texture of it, but yes, it is a branding and marketing exercise, and it's incredibly powerful. Psychology is really powerful.
Can you explain real quickly why companies would be against using a 1-to-1 ratio of glucose to fructose, which is what sucrose is?
Yeah, as soon as you go 1-to-1, you have to ask the question, why are we not using sugar as our principal ingredient? And when you put sugar in a pouch, you cannot sell it for as big of a profit. It's just, I mean, Tim Podlegar said it really well. He's like, I asked him why some of his research studies. He's Dr. Tim Podlegar researches at the same university in the UK that most of the greatest carb researchers in the world have come out of in the last 20 years. He's like, we do research on maltodextrin and fructose because sugar's not fancy enough. This is a scientific researcher. It's like, nobody cares if it's sugar, but sugar is the best, and he will say the same thing.
Yeah, real quick, and I'm gonna get back on these questions. Can you just explain because you mentioned maltodextrin there. Can you just explain kind of the offshoots of glucose and fructose really quickly for people? Because that's what they see on packages, right? And so I want them to kind of understand what those differences are, what they're looking at.
Yeah, so maltodextrin is glucose in a chain. So glucose, 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 glucose. It breaks apart enzymatically in your gut. And it is just a source of glucose. Fructose is just single units of fructose. Sucrose, table sugar. So sucrose, table sugar, is a glucose and a fructose stuck together in one dimer, one disaccharide. And then it's naturally a 1-to-1 ratio. So yeah, all the companies are doing 1-to-0.8 to like inch their way closer to 1-to-1 because they know 1-to-1 is legit. But they're doing like a little bit more maltodextrin than fructose, and they are all arguing that that's the 1-to-0.8 is the optimal ratio, or that lowers the osmolarity or keeps the sweetness down, which is true, but they're not being totally truthful about the optimal ratio being 1-to-1.
Yeah, I think the other side effect there is just the sweetness when you get to 1-to-1. When the fructose goes up, the product becomes extremely sweet. And most of these companies save it from like very specific endurance companies, but like say like a Gatorade, right? Their target market is not, endurance athletes. Their target market is every consumer in America, right? And so they're going to obviously shy away from like an optimal endurance fueling formula because your average Joe walking down the street isn't going to want to drink that.
Can I ask a question quickly on the 1-to-1 ratio before we get with the questions again?
Yeah.
So, obviously we've heard recently, 60 grams of carbs from one kind of sugar. So we're getting 60 grams and 60 grams just from table sugar. Does that mean we're topped out at 120, or are you saying as long as we stay hydrated, you can actually go more on table sugar?
Yeah. Some people can. Some people don't need to. Some people can feel excellent on 100 or 90 or 115. But if you are if you're larger, if you're taller, you'll probably have a longer gut, which allows greater absorption. Yeah, the fitter you are, the more fuel you need. So there are people who are consuming 140 or 150 grams per hour very comfortably with just sugar. So this idea that glucose can only be consumed at 60 grams per hour hard cap for everybody is just, it's not true.
Yeah, I think that obviously through research, you have to say something, right? And so that's kind of been the dogma that's come out, is like 60 is the cap. But I think there's probably a plus or minus of, whatever percentage of variable there for every individual, because science is not like math. So it doesn't work like that. Let's hop back on the questions here real quick. So Wes, again, kind of brought up potassium, and I think, his question is, it says, but we now want to monitor potassium intake at all during training, or is that fueling prior? Basically, I think his question is, do you just not care about potassium at all, or is it just so low on the totem pole that you shouldn't spend a ton of time? Like, you're going to get it through other sources in your diet, I guess is probably what you're saying. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say I don't not care about potassium. I just don't care about it enough to put it in my sports drink.
Cool.
But yes, yeah, you will get potassium from other things in your diet. And if you want to include like 50 milligrams of potassium per liter of water, it's probably not going to hurt anything.
All right, that's good. This is a good question. I was trying to get you to continue because I was reading the next question, so that was good. So Conrad's got a question here. So if one senses your bladder is getting full, does that mean bad luck, need to stop, or does the human philosophy somehow allow for water absorption from your bladder? He said 0 probability I can empty my bladder on this bike or this run without stopping.
I love this question because I like the way this person thinks. This is a conversation that Michelle and I have like argued about at the dinner table. Can we reabsorb through the bladder? And I would say yes, but very, very, very negligibly. So basically no. So if you have a full bladder, it's not going to go back in. You're going to have to use the restroom, or just, I mean, I think most folks will pee on the bike, but maybe if you're not comfortable with that, then don't do that.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a question, and this is a good question. Do you have an idea if only using liquid nutrition or trying to get all the carbs and sodium while biking, will the stomach just get too full, or what happens if the stomach gets? I guess the question there is like, a lot of people would come back and say, well, I can't use liquid nutrition because my stomach gets too full, right?
Sure.
What is your, like, how would you have them solve that issue?
Yeah, good question. It usually comes down to more steady fueling, not getting behind, starting from truly the first pedal stroke. And that's actually the language we decided to use in the app on the fuel consumption instructions page, is like, start consuming your fuel mix at the first pedal stroke or at your first foot strike. And honestly, for some folks, for some clients of mine who struggle to consume regularly, because it just feels like, why am I consuming something in the first 20 minutes or first 45 minutes of activity? Like, I don't feel like I need anything. I just had breakfast. I don't feel like I need anything. I will actually ask them to to start sipping their sports drink 5 minutes before they start exercising, just so that they sort of like mentally break the seal, and they'll just keep sipping after that.
That's a good point. I typically will start when I'm like getting my bike ready. So like, obviously like putting computer on, and, you have your bottle there, right? So you might as well just start drinking it. And I've always found that kind of helps, as you're rolling out, that you've already been drinking out of the bottle. So you might as well just keep going. All right.
Especially
go ahead.
If you're a busy person, like most triathletes are like pretty type A folks, you're busy. Chances are your pre-workout meal timing might not be perfect. And so it makes sense sometimes to start sipping your carbs like 5, 10, 15 minutes before your training session to get your blood sugar elevated going into the training session.
Yeah, even I think a lot of people will train in the morning too, right? So especially if you're coming off fasted, then that's another reason that you should start immediately.
Can we just talk about, I know we touched on that, but if people can't eat breakfast before because they're training at 4:30 in the morning, what do you have your clients do for those early morning sessions?
Yeah, great question. This is a question that I drove my CTO or our CTO for the app crazy about, because he could not believe that we needed to put a checkbox in the app to allow people to drink some of their fuel and indicate how much fuel to drink before training, just because of the pre-workout nutrition. He's a volleyball player, so that was news to him. But yeah, that's how you do it. You basically don't eat breakfast, or eat a super light, carb only, low fiber, low protein, low fat breakfast, and then start sipping your intra workout fuel mix like 20-25 minutes before training, and just sip steadily, just like you're training, starting from 25 minutes before training.
Give me an example quickly of a high carb, low fat, low fiber breakfast.
Yeah. Quick oats with cinnamon and sugar.
Perfect. Love it. Let's look at, okay, so Braden said, yeah, sugar 1-to-1 ratio is best. Why are some companies still pushing 0.8 or 1.8 to 2 to 1? Just said behind the research. And I think we kind of touched on that, but
yeah, mostly just behind in the research. Yep. And you can't sell 1-to-1. It'll feel silly. People won't buy it.
And then Ashley said literally just sugar, salt, and water. Is that what you're saying? Question mark. Yeah.
I prefer having a bit of some sort of product mixed with it, because I don't like the taste of sugar. We call it speed nectar in the app. I don't really like the taste of what we call speed nectar, but there are some people on Slow Twitch who are like, I've been drinking the speed nectar, man. It's delicious, and Michelle likes it. So
I think that's where the financial factor becomes I think that's where the financial factor becomes a thing now, because your go-to is just like normal Gatorade because of the cost, right?
Sure. Yeah. And
all right,
I have a box of like tons of powders, and I just flavor it with something.
Yeah. All right. Here's my guys. If you have other questions, Braden said he likes to add a little lemon juice in there, which is actually a good point, because lemon juice is sour, right? And so it's going to cut down on the sweetness a little bit. That's just how our taste palate works, right? If something's very sweet and you add like something that is like an acid to it, like a sour tasting, then it's going to bring the sweetness factor back down a little bit. I'll give everybody here, I'm going to ask another question, and just to give everybody a chance, if you have questions, put them in the chat, because like this is your chance to ask Alex a pointed question about your nutrition, and he's not cheap to work with, so this is your chance. So I'm gonna say this is another anecdote from me as a coach. I get athletes who come to me and they say, I don't want to consume that much sugar, right, because it's going to make my blood sugar spike, or it's going to make my insulin spike, right? So I don't want to do that. I don't think it's safe for my long-term health.
Yep.
What is your thoughts there?
Totally. Thoughts are, during exercise, your body functions differently than any other time in your life. Your pancreas functions differently than any other time in your life. All of the hormonal balance in your body is different during exercise than any other time. What that means is your pancreas releases less insulin, by as much as 50 times less during exercise, because your muscles are ultra sensitive to the carbs in your blood sugar, or to the sugar in your blood. And it is the post blood sugar spike, insulin spike, that actually causes pancreatic damage. It's that the pancreas has to overproduce insulin. That's what causes long-term health issues and type 2 diabetes, etc., blood sugar dysregulation, etc. And you don't get that during exercise. You don't see the pancreas outputting insulin at a high rate during exercise, because it senses, well, it just works differently during exercise, because there's all sorts of different hormones in the blood that regulate the pancreas not to do that. So there's actually none of the damaging mechanisms to the pancreas are present during exercise. Now, if you were to consume 100 grams of sugar per hour outside of exercise, yes, that would create an enormous blood sugar spike, which would be responded to by the pancreas with a really high insulin spike, and that over time fairly quickly would actually damage the pancreas, kill cells of the pancreas, and you would end up with type 2 diabetes.
Yeah, I think That was like a year or two ago when Peter Tia got really popular before Andrew Huber and stuff, and they were pushing like CGMs and stuff to do some of this tracking. And I know that continuous glucose monitoring has become a thing in the sport for some people, and there's some companies that have now developed out of that. But I will say anecdotally, again, I did this for you guys research wise. I wore a CGM for about 2 months while I was training and would consume 100 to 120 grams of carbohydrates, during my rides. And the thing I noticed is my blood sugar never changed. Like it literally,
That's so cool.
it's exactly the same. There was no spike, but I would eat like grapes or something, or a banana. Like I would eat some sort of like fruit, or even just like a cookie or a candy bar outside of training, and you would see a huge spike in your blood sugar, which is just, again, why, like, it goes against everything you think is possible when you're doing it, but then like you were saying, the body obviously accounts for it. So yeah, again, some of these hurdles, guys, I think when it comes to nutrition, it's a lot of mental hurdles. Like the science is there. We just have to kind of get over it mentally, or look at other factors in our life that may be contributing to issues that we're having, and not just blaming it on something that is like nutrition during training. So thoughts on coconut water? Is it the nectar of the gods, or is it just a marketing ploy?
It's really high potassium and low sodium, so it's kind of the opposite of what you want during training.
Perfect. This is a good one. So, sorry. What do you suggest for caffeine?
That depends on how many cups of coffee a day you're drinking. If you are a heavy coffee drinker, you might need 3, 4, 5 milligrams per kilogram of body weight for like moderate to intense exercise, or even like 6, 7, 8 milligrams per kilogram for racing. If you do not consume any coffee, you might only need like 2 or 3 milligrams per kilogram for like your hardest training sessions and your races, because you're going to be more sensitive to it. And I want to bring up one other point, that the don't do anything new on race day advice is really close to being really good advice. It's good advice. It's good advice. It's not the very best advice. The very best advice is you can actually change your fuel consumption and your caffeine consumption on race day. And you can usually increase caffeine consumption safely by like 25-50% on race day and be just fine. Key is caffeine blunts hunger, so don't let it stop you from fueling on race day. If you don't do that, you'll be fine. Generally, you can increase your hydration, so sodium and fluid intake on race day, and be just fine. And you might need to, because you're going harder and sometimes in a hotter environment that you've been in. So sweat rates and sweat salt concentration can be higher. So a little bit higher on the hydration on race day is sometimes a good idea. And then sometimes be cautious with carbohydrate intake on race day. So maybe hit the same as you've been doing in your hardest training sessions, or maybe 5 grams per hour less. Just be cautious if you're really pushing the intensity.
Do you have a recommendation for people who maybe like heavy caffeine consumers, like I drink like 5 cups of coffee a day, right? Yeah. So it's, going into a race, right? So like, what's kind of your protocol maybe to bring that caffeine dependency down? How long does it take? Is it beneficial to do that, or would it just be, hey, let's just take more?
I would say if you're on the extreme end and you're like a 6 to 8 cup a day person, or 6 to 10 cups a day kind of person, it might be beneficial to bring it down some the couple weeks before, especially the week of the race, so that you don't have to push up into like really super high doses to get that little like bump in effect that we're looking for. But no, generally outside of those extreme scenarios, no, I don't have people bring it down much. If you're going to bring it down by like 100 mgs a day, or like by 25% a day, or maybe 50% a day. But resensitization is not the most important thing with caffeine. The most important thing is that you have it. It works. It works whether it feels like it's working or not. It works. Just take it consistently from about 30 to 60 minutes before your race to probably 2 hours before the end of your race, maybe like 90 minutes before the end of your race.
How would you sorry.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, how would what source would you get it from? Is what I want to
Yeah.
know. So like I'm on the bike, I want to get caffeine in. How would I get it in?
It depends on how
Caffeine
much you want to
pills.
prepare for your race. If you don't mind, like here's one option. You can buy caffeine capsules from like bulksupplements.com on Amazon or on their website, and those capsules have powder in them. They're just gelatin capsules, and you can cut them in half and pour some of the caffeine into your fuel bottle. And if you're fueling with a reasonable carb and sodium amount, you won't taste the caffeine in there. And so that's a good way to have a pretty measured amount of caffeine. You can also just do caffeine pills. Like if you're going to be carrying a gel, or you have a box on your bike, some sort of storage that's easy access, you can carry caffeine pills, split them so that they're in like 50 milligram or 100 milligram doses, and that makes it pretty easy to just take on the go. Gels are another great option.
I was just going to ask, what are the quick benefits of caffeine for those? Because I don't think we touched on that, especially on race day.
Race day for sure is the willingness to suffer and the mood enhancement, sort of staying in the zone mentally. That's probably the biggest benefit. Yes, it also does improve fat oxidation slightly, but if I had to guess, I would say for most people, it's about how hard they're willing to push and how steadily they're willing to push that hard. That's where caffeine really pays off.
I'll say, and you can either tell me I'm wrong or agree with me. I think that caffeine is probably one of the best PEDs, like legal PEDs we have that has research backing it. Would you agree with that in terms of like what we have available to us that is legal to use on race day?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
All right, I'm going to ask you this other question because this is the one I'm getting a lot now. The non-research PED that everyone's talking about is ketones.
Yep, ketones.
And so all my triathlon pros that I follow on the socials are telling me that I should be taking this ketone or that ketone. What is your thoughts on ketones?
Yeah, to be honest, I wouldn't say the case is closed, but I would say the first thing that I do is I read the research and I ask, what is the incentive? And then I examine what's happening. And the incentive is really high because the margins on these supplements are really, really high. And it's when you're selling these things for like $40 or $70 a bottle, huge margin supplements. And so they can afford, VC funded companies come in and can afford to sponsor big athletes. And I will say there are some strong anecdotes out there. So there are athletes who are finding that like this, they're convinced, non-sponsored, not affiliated, they're convinced that it does help them. And I have not tried the bottle that one brand sent me. I just haven't gotten around to it yet, but I'll give it a shot. But the research is pretty clear that it's not worth doing.
Awesome. I'll give you a chance here as we wrap up, but to kind of plug every way that people can follow you. But Michael Craig, I have the one last question here. Outside of sucrose and sodium chloride, would sodium citrate, dextrose, and dextrin be all you need to minimize gastric distress and maximize fueling?
Say the 3 carb ingredients again.
He said sodium citrate, dextrose, and dextrin.
Oh, sorry. Sodium citrate plus 2 carb ingredients, dextrose and dextrin. No, dextrose is glucose outside the body. Dextrose is just a nomenclature, a name difference. Dextrose and glucose are the same thing. Dextrin is a different kind of change together glucose. So with dextrose and dextrin, you just have glucose. So you're not getting any fructose. You're not meeting that glucose-fructose ratio.
So I think, again, the point here to minimize gastric distress would just be to stay hydrated.
Yeah, and you have to have fructose. If you're consuming more than 50, 60 grams an hour, you have to have fructose in the mix.
Yeah. Okay, so let's wrap up here. Give me all the ways that people can follow you, because guys, here's the best thing. Alex reads all the research, so you don't have to. So when you have questions about like ketones, you can just go look at his opinion that he's posted on Slow Twitch or on 15 other websites that he frequents, and just know that like, okay, that guy read the research, so I'm good. And he has no skin in the game in terms of the sponsors like peddling their products. So give me all your ways people can follow you.
Yeah, and then the nice thing is, as a software company now, and as a coach, if one of those things turns out to be really beneficial, I'll just start using it and I'll put it in our app. So yeah, if it's not in the app, then it probably doesn't work, or we just haven't gotten around to it, like caffeine yet.
Yeah.
But yes, the Saturday morning.fit is our app website. SaturdayMorning.fit. You can get us on iOS. Just Google like Saturday Fuel or Nutrition, Saturday Triathlon Fuel or something. Will come up. In iOS and Android app stores. Yeah, Dr. Alex Harrison on Instagram, Dr. Alex Harrison pretty much everywhere. Reddit, Slow Twitch, Trainer Road Forum, Facebook, RP Endurance group. If you're in that group, shoot me an email.
Yeah, that's a great group. I'll have to say, for those who have kind of gone down the RP Strength rabbit hole, RP Strength has a Facebook group that is purely for endurance athletes, which is, obviously a bunch of like-minded people who like RP, but also like endurance sports. So, and Alex, I know you're a moderator for that, and your wife, I think. So, yeah, we'll put all that stuff in an email when Natasha sends this out to everybody. So we're good there. So, all right, appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your time tonight. It was really helpful. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully you got a lot out of that. And then we will see you guys next week. So I hope you all have a great week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.